Is the Earth flat or is it spherical? This was a question that started to creep into public discourse at about maybe the 5th century BC. And this is when Greek philosophers started to suggest that the Earth may not be flat after all, that it might be spherical. But it took 200 years for that to become accepted knowledge. So about 300 BC was the point where people began to accept that the Earth was spherical and not flat. So 200 years of what I call the pain period, where people object to this new theory. They get quite vocal about how this can't possibly be true. But as we now know, it is true. So the thinking went from here to here. The thinking changed. That also has happened with a more recent discovery. So when I was at school, we were taught that there were 5 human senses. But if you Google it now, you will realize, or you will find out, that there are far more human senses. So for example, there's one that talks about how the human body knows exactly where the ear is or the nose is, so we can touch them without having to see them. So we've gone from 5 senses to far more senses. I don't know, I say far more because I don't really know how many there are. It's definitely more than 10. But the point is not how many senses there are. The point is that the thinking changed. The scientific thinking changed. And I don't recall ever seeing too much wailing and gnashing of teeth regarding the change of thinking with senses, but with loudspeaker cables that I think really emerged, like audiophile loudspeaker cables, or the idea that loudspeaker cables can sound different, emerged in the late 70s. So people stopped using lamp cord and started to use more advanced constructed cables. Now, as you will probably imagine, there was probably quite a few shit fights about those ideas. But now, so like 40 years later, 30 years later, I think most audiophiles are across the fact that the thinking has changed. That, maybe in the 60s, everybody thought that all cables sound the same, but for loudspeakers, that is. And now I think most people think that's not necessarily the case. I'm not making any comment about the value proposition of those cables. That's nothing to do with this. It's just that the thinking changed from loudspeaker cables all sound the same to no, actually, they sound different. Now, changing the thinking in these fields like taste, spherical earth, loudspeaker cables, was done by what we would kind of loosely call experts. So guys who work in this field, devote their lives to these fields, and therefore we could say that Greek philosophers, biologists, neuroscientists, audio engineers, these are experts that changed over time public thinking. But it's that over time thing that's the problem, because obviously new ideas can meet with a lot of resistance, which is why I call this kind of this the time needed to change the thinking. It's why I call it the pain period. Now, what did the 1980s give us? Leg warmers, Rubik's Cube, Scratch and Sniff, remember Scratch and Sniff? And soap operas, but it also gave us the CD. And we were told, remember this? We were told that CDs were indestructible. But we now know that not to be true. You can scratch them pretty easily, and some of them suffer from surface rot, some of them. So again, with the indestructibility of CDs, the thinking changed, and it took place over time. I mean, nobody in the 80s went, oh, hang on a minute, CDs are not indestructible. It took time for that to filter through to become more accepted, more conventional thinking. Now, also during that marketing push for the CD, we were told that it was digital audio, that it was all perfect, it was ones and zeros, that signal was incorruptible and would be the same no matter how it was transmitted because it was digital. But remember, this was back in the 80s. I bought into that idea because it's a very simple idea. Ones and zeros, everything's the same. Like, the simplicity is extremely, extremely attractive. And I thought this, I didn't think to question this line of thinking that, ones and zeros were perfect no matter what laser was used, what cable was used. I never thought to question that throughout the 90s when I was listening to CDs, or even through the 2000s. It's only when I had a squeeze box touch and I was using the coaxial output, and then one day a friend brought over a spitter-free clocker. And of course I'm like, oh, come on, like, you know, digital audio is all ones and zeros. And we hooked this thing up, and sure enough, there was an audible difference between it being in the chain, the reclocker, and not. And that's where my world was really, you know, my worldview was, in the hi-fi sense, was shifted. And then I could repeat this with other gear that I tried. So over the last 10 years, I've been trying different digital sources and hearing differences. So that then led me to ask digital audio engineers, experts, why? Like, what is going on here? And I ask experts because I put value in experts. So, for example, like if I'm sick, I don't get my neighbor to diagnose me. I go to the doctor and I trust in his advice, prescriptions completely. I don't doubt it. I don't ask for a peer-reviewed white paper for the antibiotics that he's giving me. I just trust his expert knowledge because he has devoted his life to that field, so he knows more than I do. And if I had a car and it broke down, I would take it to the garage because I would trust the mechanic who has spent many years repairing cars, trust in his experience, his expertise, in being able to fix my car and diagnose problems and troubleshoot and things like that. In that area, I trust in experts. And experts are crucial to our understanding of the world because they've done the hard work that we haven't, and we haven't had the time to do because we do other things. So we look to experts to explain to us, you know, basic things like the Archimedes principle, Newton's laws of physics, electricity. Olaf and I were just talking about Kepler's laws of planetary motion. Bringing it more up to date, like when we fly somewhere, when we take a plane, we trust in, you know, the engineers that build these planes, the guys that run the airport, that the plane will take off and land without any issue at all. We trust in the experts. We also trust in our own experience. We look at the experience of others. We see them get on planes, fly somewhere else, land, and they don't die. So our experience sort of jives with generally what we're told, that planes can take off, fly somewhere and land. But we don't need a detailed explanation of this to get on a plane. And if expert thinking changes, as it has done with many of the examples I've given already today, our thinking can eventually, slowly, change with it. So we only have to think about, like, Pluto was a member of the solar system, and then it wasn't, and I think it might be again, I'm not sure. But we trust in experts to decide this for us. And I guess we're all going through this pain period now, or many of us are. Some of us are already across it. Climate change. Climate change is becoming a more accepted idea. Governments are kicking very slowly into action. I know these are controversial subjects. I know this has nothing to do with digital audio. But it's the idea that over time, the thinking changes. And we have to adapt to that thinking. And that thinking invariably comes from experts. So when I hear ongoing differences between different digital transports, different digital sources, I don't go to some kind of like amateur guy who's just measured a few things and tinkered with a few things maybe in the last couple of years. I go to an expert. I go to somebody who's been designing digital audio products for years and years and years. So people like Gordon Rankin, Jürgen Reis, Mark Jenkins of Antipodes Audio. He's been doing this for a long time. Nuno from Inuus, Torsten Loesch from AMR and iFi, Ted Smith, Rob Watts, all of these guys are experts in the digital audio field. And I trust in their explanations of why digital transports can sound different because they're experts. And all of these guys, all of them that I've spoken to, they all say that the thinking that started in the 80s, that digital audio was all ones and zeros, was perfect, was incorruptible, that thinking has changed, mainly because of issues of jitter and electrical noise affecting the signal. Now, the way I see it, especially in digital audio, the number one cause of change pain is a lack of experience. If you sit at home and you cling to the 80s ideas that digital audio is the same, and you don't go and listen to other digital transports or different digital feeds, you don't extend your own experience, then your thinking is going to remain fixed and rooted in the 80s. And I guess clinging to the arresting simplicity of digital audio all being the same always is kind of comforting. And the fact that you don't have to leave your house and don't have to listen to any gear is really easy, but it's also a bit lazy because you're not considering the possibility that there actually might be differences that you could hear. So normally I listen to different digital transports, streamers and things like that here. But was it November or was it October? November, I went to a local dealer here in Berlin to listen to a demo of the Inuus Phoenix USB reclocker. Now, I wasn't too sure whether I would hear the differences in a store environment. The guys from Inuus set up a Zenith music server streamer, USB out into an audio system, and then they introduced the Phoenix, so that would reclock the Zenith's USB audio out. And the difference was it wasn't really what I expected actually. And there were a few of us there and we all agreed that the Phoenix made the Zenith sound softer, like more relaxed, but like softer. It's kind of hard to describe because it was just a demo, but it was definitely audible. Now, those of you who are thinking, oh yeah, but this is just confirmation bias. Well, that idea, I thought that may be the case, but actually the next step, that was undone because I was expecting the move then to the Inuus Statement two-piece box to be even more softer, more at ease. So that was my expectation, but it wasn't like that. It was actually kind of the opposite. It was more come at you, it was more dynamic, it was punchier. And that was one of the most mind-blowing listening experiences I had last year. But the point is that the few of us that were there, we could all discern the differences between those digital transports. There was one guy there who was a little bit unsure about these differences, so he had his eyes opened, and I think his thinking changed maybe a little bit. Maybe he started to doubt the idea that digital audio was just ones and zeros. So experience changes thinking. It's the experience that's the key factor here. It's getting off your ass and going to listen. You've got to do that. So if you don't want to go out and listen for yourself, that's okay, that's your choice. But if you continue to outwardly rubbish the work of experts, of those who know far more than you and me about digital audio, then you're just perpetuating falsehoods. You're perpetuating the out-of-date thinking from the 80s because the thinking has emphatically changed. And if you continue to perpetuate falsehoods that we now know not to be true because of what experts tell us, you run the very real risk of sounding like a conspiracy theorist in the audio world. Anyway, this is just my opinions. These are my personal opinions of the digital audio world, my experiences, what I see, what other people tell me, what other experts tell me. I'm not saying that I'm 100% correct. I'm just presenting an argument that I felt very strongly about for a long time now. And I thought trying to distill it down into this video might work for some people. I know it will agitate many, many people. I understand that. But please, calm the farm, cool your jets. I mean, just because people have differences of opinion doesn't mean that we have to be at each other's throats. We can go, yeah, I don't think that way. I see it this way. And then somebody else goes, oh, cool, I never thought about it that way, which doesn't really happen very often on the internet, which is the problem with internet discourse. Yeah. Anyway, if you do like this video, if this talks to you, if this sort of editorial jives with your thinking, then please give us a like down here. I won't do these kinds of videos very often. I think they're a bit too controversial for most people. So if you don't mind that, if you don't mind the occasional one of these, then please subscribe to this channel. And as always, thank you for listening. Thank you for listening to my opinion, even if you don't agree with it. I appreciate the time that you gave to this video. So thank you for watching.